So I'm Sarvenaz Tash. I'm an author. These are some of my books. And like Elsa said, I'm going to talk today basically about how you make a book, like how something goes from an idea in my head to a book that you can pick up and check out and read. So the Queen of Ocean Parkway, Elsa told you a little bit, but it's about this girl named Roya, who is the daughter of the super of this big old apartment building in Brooklyn. And one of her favorite tenants goes missing. She basically is on the case to kind of solve the mystery. So we'll start with step one, which is obviously the story. So you need 3 ingredients to write a story. Anyone want to guess what they are?
Beginning, middle, end.
Yes, that's in there. Yes. Character is one. Conflict, yes, that's another one. The third one? Setting. Yay. Okay, you guys got it. So yeah, you need a character, a setting, and a problem, which is the plot. So based on what you guys know about the book, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I live in Brooklyn, in a building much like Roya's. What do you guys think I did first for this book? Yep, the setting. Nice job. Thank you, Pia. Yeah, so for all my books, I actually usually approach it a different way, but for this one, the setting was the first thing I did, because in this case, the setting was literally my home and my building and my neighborhood, so it was right in front of me. It was very easy to be inspired by it. I was also writing this mostly started writing it right during the pandemic, and I was really missing home, even though I was home. So I think I was writing a lot of like what I missed about New York, like the subway and going to Coney Island, the things I used to do with my kids that I couldn't do anymore. So it was a little bit of wish fulfillment, but also centering around my home. So after I had the setting, then I had to come up with the character. So I knew I had this big building in this neighborhood, but I thought, well, who would live there? And I thought a good character to live there would be the super's kid, because she would have a lot of access to the tenants and the stories that the tenants have, and just kind of what's going on in the building. I also read Harriet the Spy a lot when I was a kid, so it was kind of my homage to that. And I always loved the idea of this kid that has so much like power that most kids don't have. And then I had to think about what's she like? What is this character like? What are her likes and dislikes? What are her strengths and weaknesses? And I decided that she is really curious and really independent. And that kind of ties into the fact that she has all this access, because she also just is innately curious, so she wants to know what's going on in the apartments. In fact, she has a secret podcast about spilling the tea on the tenants that her mom doesn't know about. But also her strengths and weaknesses kind of all tie in, because being curious and being independent can be a strength and a weakness, right, depending on the situation. So that's kind of how I decided who the main character would be. And then I got to the plot, which was, one of the tenants goes missing, and the main character has to solve the mystery. So I put this little together because I think those are the 3 things you really need to make any story. And I kind of put some little other things you might be doing when you're making a character, which is like character profiles. So sometimes I'll actually have worksheets where I kind of figure out who my character is and what they have done before the story, what their biggest fear is, what their favorite color is, just so I get to know them better as I'm writing the story. It helps me to kind of understand where they're going if I know where they're coming from. And then the plot. So here I wrote plotters versus pantsers, because writers tend to kind of fall into these 2 categories. Plotters are people who usually outline, and they kind of know what they're going to write before they write it. And pantsers, which is a funny word, but they're writers who fly by the seat of their pants and they just write. They don't necessarily know, what's going to happen next. And there's no right or wrong way to do it, actually. Both ways are fine. Any way you get the story out is the correct way. But writers do tend to kind of fall into these 2 categories. And I'm a plotter personally. I really like outlining, because I also get kind of intimidated by the idea of writing a book, even though I've written 9 of them. So the idea that I'm writing an outline and that I'm following the outline step by step just kind of calms me down personally. And then I put research here I mean, research can really go into any of these things, but I put it under a setting, and because for this particular book, I did have to do a lot of research about Coney Island and different time periods and stuff, so that was kind of where most of my research went, but depending on the book, the research kind of goes in different places. So I put all these together, it goes in the cauldron, and poof, it's a book. This is usually when I tell the kids, it's a book. I'm like, is it really? No, I am just kidding, I wish, but no. So that's step one when I come up with the idea is really the first draft, and I really kind of like to think of the first draft as creating the pieces of a puzzle. So although a lot of the elements of the story might already be there, it's not complete until you put the pieces together, right? So that gets us to step two, which is revision. You might have heard this phrase, writing is rewriting, because most of what you're doing as a writer is really this, revision. So now I need to make the pieces work together, create a better, more complete picture, and I do that by focusing on some of these things like better plot development, and better character development, and better word choice and sentence structure. So these are some of the questions I ask myself when I'm doing the revision process. So for better plot development, does the story make sense is a big one, because in my head sometimes it makes sense, and then I come back and read it and it's not connecting. Pacing is a really big one for me, just because as a reader I like reading fast-paced books, and as a writer I like writing fast-paced books, particularly when I'm writing for kids. I don't want them to put the book down. So I think about, does the story ever slow down too much or get too boring, like whether there's chunks of text where nothing is happening or it's too much description, and I either have to go in and make something happen or take it out. The third one is, can I give my characters bigger, more complicated problems, which also ends up giving me bigger and more complicated problems, because then I have to get them out of it. But that's like a really big one, because in order to make the pacing good and make the story not get boring or slow down, they have to keep kind of encountering bigger and bigger problems as the book goes on. Which also gets me to better character development. So while I'm very much thinking about the plot, I also have to think about my characters, because it's very important that a character changes throughout the story. They have to be a little bit different from, and it doesn't have to be a big change, but they have to be at least a little bit different at the end than they were at the beginning, because this experience that they've gone through has to have changed them in some way. So while I'm thinking about the plot arc, I'm also thinking about the character arc. And then how do I make my characters feel more like real people? This is an important one for me too, because again, I think this really ties back into pacing or someone not putting the book down. I think you want your reader to really care about the character, and the way to do that is to make them feel real. And one of the ways I make my characters feel real is kind of by giving them little quirks or little details that make them kind of unique. So like my one character, Amin, here, I'll show you. That's him. He really loves the New York City subway system, and he's like a big subway buff, and he wears these subway shirts every day. And it's just it's a quirk that's pretty unique to him, and I think it makes him feel more like a real person. And then the third is the more granular thing, right? It's better word choice, sentence structure. Am I always using the best words? I am not always using the best words in my first draft. I'm often repeating words that I have to go take out. Is the meaning coming across? Like I said, are there words or phrases I'm repeating too much? So these are some people who help me revise. The first person, the first line of defense is me, right? So usually when I write a first draft, I leave it for 2 weeks to a month, and then I read it again. And a lot of times I can kind of see the ways I can make it better on my own, because I kind of come back with it with fresh eyes. But the second people who help me revise are critique partners, or usually other writers. So we'll exchange manuscripts, and we'll, kind of help each other out, because again, this is a story that's in my head. So in my head it might be clear, but really in reality on the page it's not very clear. Or another writer can sometimes see how I can do something better that I wouldn't have been able to see myself. And then the third is my agent, which is the person who basically helps sell my book to a publisher. So they're all gonna read the books and give me notes on what they like, what they feel like I could improve on. I mentioned if you're a kid, your teacher might do this for you. I think kids are very, know this process very well, because I think they get a lot of notes about revisions and stuff in school. So step 3 is selling the book. So I've now revised this book, and it's usually a few times, it's more than once. And then my agent and I feel like it's strong enough. She's going to send it out to publisher. Should I sell it? And when a publisher buys it, I get an editor. And what do you think an editor does? They edit. So step 4 is editing, which is also known as revision. So because the puzzle still doesn't look exactly right, the editor is going to read the book, and she's going to give me notes too. And usually I get something that's called, I get both an edit letter and notes within the manuscript. So I'm going to show you my edit letter for Queen of Ocean Parkway. So it looks like this. So this is all like big picture stuff. So she kind of started out, and she's like, this is what she liked, because writers need compliments, are very fragile. And then you can see she kind of divided up into like plot points and characters, kind of like those first 3 things we talked about. And that's everything that needs work, like categorized. She keeps going, a little compliment sandwich at the end. And then these are the line edits. So within the manuscript, she's actually gone through and made comments. And every page of my manuscript looks like this. There's at least one comment. Usually there's at least one comment in like every paragraph. It's like that. And it's like suggestions of things to change and cut and rework and more compliments. So this is a book that has already sold. Like it's good enough to sell, but it's still not good enough to be like published. It still needs work. So we go to step 5, which is revision again. So my editor gave me the edit letter. She gave me the line edits, and I incorporate that into my new draft. But once I give it back to her, she's still going to read it and give me even more notes. But usually this round is less big picture stuff, and it's more like the line edits, focusing on word choice, sentence structure, because hopefully I've already addressed most of the big picture stuff, right? So, yeah.
Do you have to do all the changes she suggests, or can you call her and talk to her about like some of the?
That's a great question. So no, you don't. There's this wonderful thing called stet, which I think comes from a Latin word. I don't actually know what it comes from, but basically when an editor gives you notes, you can just write stet, which means leave it as is. And sometimes we will have a conversation where I'll be like, well, I don't really think this is working, or I don't think this is what I want to do, and then she'll tell me why she wants to know, and then we'll kind of come to an agreement. But at the end of the day, it's my book, and I can really stet whatever I want. Generally, I tend to take about 85 to 90% of my edits, and then there's like 10-15% where I'm like, no, I think this is what it should be. Also, when I get my edit letter, I usually have to I read it, then I get defensive, so I never respond, and I have to leave it for 2 days, and then I come back and I'm like, oh, she's right. There's like a moment where I'm like, no, this is perfect. But yeah, so step 6, you guys ready? Drum roll. Is revision, yes, correct. Is copy edits. So copy edits is when there's a different editor called a copy editor, and they go through the manuscript, and they're checking specifically for things like grammar, punctuation, continuity. So continuity is if I say like a character has hazel eyes and suddenly they have brown eyes, the copy editor catches that. They also really look at if I have historical research in my book, they really fact check all that stuff. They're very magical people, and they know where all the commas go, which I don't, I've discovered. So now we're gonna get to I think some of the fun part, which is book production. So while I've been editing the manuscript with my editor, there's other people at the publishing house, and they're the ones who are making it look like a book. Right now it's just a Word document on my computer. It doesn't look beautiful and laid out and anything. So for example, the art director has hired an illustrator, and together they've been working on a cover. So these are the cover ideas that the art director, Carol Lai, had for the Queen of Ocean Parkway. So you can see, so the Queen of Ocean Parkway is actually the name of the building. So you can see in A, it was focused on the building, and in B, they're on the subway going to Coney Island. There's a fortune-telling machine that plays a big part in that, and you can see that's in C, and D in front of the building again, and E is one of those murder boards. A lot of kids like the E. I don't know who you guys think, which one your favorite is. But anyway, the publishing house has big meetings about this, and they discuss it, and they're like, here are the 5 ideas. You can weigh in, but you're just one voice in this big meeting. So then the art director gave this to the illustrator, Erica Lugo, and she came back with these basically 4 kind of final sketches. You can see they decided either the building or the fortune-telling machine. And you guys have seen the cover, so you know which one they went with, right? Do you know which one? 2, yes. So here's like the final sketch versus the final cover. There's not that many changes. Erica's really great. But you can see there's like a few changes, like his shirt color was, actually those shirts are real shirts in New York, and a lot of kids wear them, so they're never green. So I was like, no, this has to be black. So that was like the main change where I was like, absolutely not. But everything else, like the font and my name changed a little bit, and like the missing poster kind of went a little bit different, but those are basically kind of the 2 different covers. And then they're also laying out the book. So the production manager and the art director are working together, and they are laying out the book so it looks like a book. It has, the fonts and like the chapter titles, all the graphics there, the little flourishes in the bottom. This book has interior illustrations, so they laid out all the illustrations. And this one, actually, you can see it was one of the cover ideas, and I really liked it, but it wasn't going to be the cover, so they put it in the book, which is really great. So then we get to step 8, which is something called first pass pages, and this is what the laid out book is called. So at this point, I usually get, it looks like that. I get it as a PDF. I used to get it printed out, but now I get it as a PDF. And basically, a proofreader, my editor, and I are going to read it all through again to make sure there aren't any mistakes or typos. And guess what? Even after all these edits, there are always mistakes and typos. And in fact, my son found a typo in the finished book like 2 weeks ago. So if you read it, see if you can find it. That was fun. This is also the last time I usually read any of my books because it's the last time I can make any changes. This is like the last call. But when the first pass pages for Queen of Ocean Parkway came to me, it actually was missing 30 pages, which is not good for a mystery. So luckily I was able to tell them to, before it got printed, because the next step is something called ARCs, which are advanced reader copies. So here, I'm going to show you so this is the ARC for the Queen of Ocean Parkway. You can see it's like a paperback. It's like a little bit, it's kind of on flimsier paper. They don't print very many of these, and there's actually a little sticker here that says not for sale, because they're not for sale. They're for librarians, booksellers, book reviewers. They come out about like 3 months before the book comes out, and they're just kind of for anyone who can kind of help promote the book when it comes out. So luckily, I got them to not print the ARC with the 30 pages missing, because I was like, no one will know what's going on. So that was good. Okay, and then we get to step 10, which is release day. So it's a book. It's for real this time, and it's time to celebrate. And that's why I usually have like a launch party at a bookstore or do stuff like this, and go on to the next thing. So that's pretty much what I have. Happy to answer any questions. Yes?
I just recently read a book, and I'm reading along, and I go from one page to the next. Didn't make any sense. Went for a few pages, and then there was a page, and it made sense with that page. And this kept going on. Finally, I looked at the page numbers, and it was like page 38, page 80, page 39, page 91, and when you're tired and at night, but with all this revision and eyes on it and stuff, how would something like that have happened?
So that's actually happened to me once in one of my books, that I found out about it because someone posted on social media, and they're like, this book is broken. And I was like, what is happening? Because after all this, it still goes to the printer, and they still have to bind it. So it happens at that point where they're actually physically binding the book together. Yeah, I've seen that, and it's unfortunate. You should actually be able to return it and get them to get you a new one. The publisher will usually pulp it and do whatever. But yeah, it's frustrating, right? Especially as a reader. It's frustrating as a writer, because you're like, I spent all this time doing all this. Yeah. That's true. Yeah, you're like, maybe it's like choose your own adventure. Yes.
Yeah, this has been really interesting. I was trying to imagine myself as an author starting to work on a book for the first time. Maybe I would love to have been to receive just the briefing you've given right now to help understand the process and all the different players that I'll encounter along the way. Do you ever kind of teach this to authors?
I mean, I've done writing workshops, and I guess it's more, because if you're an author, you probably know this, you've gone through it, but I will say my first book came out, I didn't know any of this. I did not know this that this was how many rounds it took. I didn't know copy edits. I didn't know what first pass pages were. So I do think there should be more like debut authors be like a little crash course of like, this is what it's like. And then also now I feel like, authors are expected to do a lot of their own marketing and social media and things like that. So it's a little bit more challenging, but yeah, that's a really good question. I did not know a lot of this when I sold my first book at all.
A little bit of a vested interest because my wife is an editor, and I know she kind of, when she works with authors, she probably talks to them about these things.
Oh.
But I don't know that the editor necessarily has designed sort of almost like a program as opposed to teaching the little bits as you go along the way. I just sat there, I learned more, even after living with an editor for 20 years, I learned more about those things than I didn't have a framework.
Yeah, well, yeah, because it's a very niche and kind of archaic industry, to be honest. But like, yeah, why would you know that it takes 6 rounds of edits or what first pass pages are, or what arcs are? But yeah, and the fact that for the most part, I don't really have a say in my covers. They usually send them to me. They're like, here it is. Do you like it? I hope you like it because we love it. I'm like, yeah, it's great. Luckily, I love my covers. I've been very blessed with great covers, but. Yeah, I think most people don't know that it's that part of it is really not up to the author. But you can stat all the copy.
That's important.
Yes.
I just really want to thank you for including a variety of characters, especially in this day and age where there's pressure to make books not be inclusive. Can you speak to why the choices that you made and why you think it's important to have books that have representation?
Yeah, so I'm an immigrant. I came to America when I was 5, and I didn't speak English, and I went to ESL, and I went to my library a lot, and I learned a lot by reading. But I also live in a very diverse neighborhood and community, and these books take place in that neighborhood. So that was easy because I was like, this is accurate to where I live. But I also feel like it's accurate to the world I live in. Like, I feel like I live in a diverse world, and there are lots of people with lots of experiences, and I feel very passionate about writing fun books and fun rom-coms or mysteries, but kind of centering them around identities that aren't necessarily usually centered in these types of stories, because I want you to read it and want to read it, and also be like, oh, this person has this identity, and it's usually not the point of the book at all. They just are there. That's just their identity, because I think that's what the real world is like. I think these people exist, and they should exist, and they're our neighbors, and they're our friends, or they're ourselves. So that whole windows and mirrors thing, I feel very strongly about in books, because one of the reasons I write is so I can kind of experience these other lives. One of the reasons I read is that way, so I feel like it's just important. Oh, yes?
Do you have a favorite of the books you've written and why?
I do. I can't say that about my kids, but I can say it about my books. My 2 favorites are The Geek's Guide to Unrequited Love and The Queen of Ocean Parkway. And I think it's because they're for different reasons. The Geek's Guide was the easiest book I wrote, and I don't know why, but this kid's voice was just in my head from the beginning, and I've never had a book come out that easily, and also just a lot of fun to write. I had a lot of fun writing it. It was based on a lot of the John Hughes movies I grew up in. It takes place at Comic-Con, and it's just very, it's a teen book, so it was a lot of fun. The Queen of Ocean Parkway felt super, super personal because I was writing it during the pandemic, and it had a lot to do with my kids and with my aunt who was ill and lots of things going on, but I still wanted to make it a fun mystery. So I think those are my 2 favorites. The Treasure of Ocean Parkway, which is the sequel to The Queen of Ocean Parkway, was very daunting to me because I'd never written a sequel before. I only wrote standalones. And I usually, because I've never written a sequel, I usually know the character and the story idea right off the bat. But with Treasure of Ocean Parkway, I just had a setting and some characters, and I had no plot because it was a brand new mystery. So I was really worried about it, but actually I think it turned out, I'm really proud of it. I think it turned out really good. So I'm really excited about that one too.
Is there any scary parts in all of them?
Are there scary parts in them? No, not really. I don't write scary books. Do you like scary books or you don't like scary books? Yeah, they're not scary. Even the ghost in Mad Maker and the Ghost is a very friendly ghost. Yeah, that's a good question. Because I also don't like scary things, and I usually am like, is this going to be a scary movie?
Sorry, if any of the kids
Oh, no.
want to ask a question, but what would you advise a young writer in 10, 14 that reads a lot and might like to write also? I mean, to continue, for example, with revision, because, I mean, even for me, when I write something, I don't like to revise something and say, okay, no more. So what are your tips to keep going and get it done?
It's true, because I feel like once you've written the first draft, it's like, I've written 200 pages, this is done, right? Like, I've already done this. So even I am like, I don't want to revise. But first of all, I think if they're reading and writing, those are like exactly what they should be doing, because that is literally how you learn to write, is to read and write. I mean, it sounds like very basic, but it's true. But I think a really good way to revise is to take writing workshops, and just kind of, it gives you accountability. It also, you find writing critique partners in those workshops, not even just the teacher, but the actual other writers in the room. And the fact that you have to show it to somebody will make you revise it. Because it's just innately, you're like, this isn't that great, I should fix this and make it better. So yeah, I feel like, and like, I'm sure the community here seems so like, the library here seems so great. I'm sure there's like lots of writing workshops around here, I would have to guess.
Do some of these books like reflect off of your own like experience, or like maybe like things that's happening to you?
Yeah, what's funny is that like all my characters are me and none of my characters are me at the same time, which is interesting. All my books have something in it that are like, that I either really love or I've experienced. So like 3 Day Summer takes place at the 1969 Woodstock Music Festival, which I was not alive for, but I've always loved it. And the only way I could go was to write about it, so that's why I wrote it. And Virtually Yours is about a virtual reality dating app that does not exist, but I just thought it'd be like a fun idea. But Queen of Ocean Parkway always takes place in my neighborhood in Coney Island. I love going to Comic-Cons. A Geek's Guide is like very big part of that. A Whole Song and Dance is about a girl who's going to NYU art school, which I did. So yeah, there's like pieces of me in all of them. None of them are like very autobiographical, because I think I really like to fictionalize things, but there's definitely pieces of me, and also probably pieces of things people have said that I've hidden in there. Because writers definitely steal a lot of like things they overhear.
So let's say you sold your book for, I don't know, $30,000. Do you have to pay the copywriter, the editor, your agent, the printing, the publisher? Does all that come out of your?
So that's a really good question. So when you sell a book, you get an advance. So like you said, like maybe $30,000. The publisher is the one that pays for the printing, the illustrator, the copy editor. You do pay a percentage to your agent. The agent is the only one that gets a percentage from you. And this is again for traditional publishing, like indie publishing is very different. But then what you have to do is, so it's called an advance because you have to earn that advance back with copies sold, and then you get royalties off the copies sold. So it's like a very complicated math thing.
They pay for the stuff up front then?
Yes.
And then as your book sells, they take parts of that back?
So if it was $30,000, the book has to make $30,000 back first before like I would see any royalties. So that's kind of how it works, yeah. And then they also they're doing marketing, whatever they're doing, and they're paying their staff. So, so yeah, just the agent part comes out of the author's advance. Yeah.
Have you had any other books narrated, like in the audio books?
Yes, so Queen of Ocean Parkway is, A Whole Song of Dance is, and I think those are the only two, and Treasure of Ocean Parkway will be. So it's funny because I'm also not that involved in that process. So, and also it's more recent that YA and kids books have become audiobooks, so that's why my older ones aren't. And my 2 romance books are also, I think, have audiobooks. So usually, sometimes I've gotten a link and it's like, here's your audiobook, kind of like I got my cover, and I'm like, okay. Occasionally they're like, here's the narrator, I know authors who pick their narrators and who are and I don't listen to audiobooks, however I know that I know people who do, and I feel like obviously the narrator is a big, very important part of it, right? So it's weird that I feel so removed from it, but I also, because I don't listen to them, I feel like I don't have much of like a, I don't know, I don't feel that comfortable being like, well, I think it should be this, because I'm like, it's not what I listen to. Like, I'm not a user of it, so I feel like, but I do know for Queen of Ocean Parkway and Whole Saga Dance, they picked like Iranian narrators so they could pronounce the words and stuff, so that was cool. But yeah, and I also can't listen to my own audiobooks because it's very cringe. like I have like 2 paragraphs and I'm like, and I'm good.
Yeah, I really value the curiosity of your characters and the interplay of generations and the kind of trust that was built, the relationships that were built, the kind of honoring of some intuitive things which were so dismissive of typically in our culture, but they can serve us so well.
No, thank you.
Very rich.
I mean, it was partially written for my kids, and it was partially written in honor of my grandmothers, because, so I really loved them and I missed them and I like thought about them a lot, so I feel like that was probably why, and also I have a very big family and there's a lot of like cousins and aunts and they're all like in and out, so it was just kind of, I don't know, the story, that part of the story just kind of, I didn't like mean for it to happen, it just like came out that way, A lot of times, like, I don't know the themes of my books until after I've written them. I have no idea. I like write the plot, and then I'm like, oh, this is what I was trying to work out. My therapist tells me usually, like, this is what you were trying to work out. So,
Well, Roya and Amin had a lot to teach us about just their acceptance of people and each other, just the acceptance of it and the curiosity about each other without an intrusion. But
yeah, I mean, I feel like that tends to be in all my books because maybe that's just kind of how I want the world to work. So I write it that way.
I noticed you said you went to art school, and what caused you to switch over to writing, which I know is also artistic?
Yeah, so I actually went to film school. So it was the Tisch School of the Arts, so it was film school. So I went to film school thinking I like wanted to make films, but within like my freshman year, I was like, oh, I just want to write screenplays. Like I don't want to actually be on set. So that's what I was doing, and it actually helped me a lot writing books because obviously the structure of it is very similar, and you're telling a story. Actually helped me a lot writing kids' books because screenplays are so visual and they have to be pretty concise and things have to be happening, But the main reason I switched is because I didn't want to move to LA. I wanted to stay in New York, and I was like, maybe I'll just go back to when I was 7, I wanted to be a children's book author. So I was like, it was always the first thing I wanted to be. So I was like, I'll just go back to that. And I ended up taking like a writing workshop and like working on The Mapmaker and the Ghost, just my first book, and just kind of, was able to keep doing it.
Has being a parent influenced the way you write your younger characters, or do you feel like that stayed?
The way it influenced my writing is that I'm much more sympathetic towards parents now. Like, my first book was middle grade, and I was not a parent yet. And the general rule of writing middle grade is get rid of the parents and like have the kids lead the thing, and parents don't matter and nobody cares about the parents. And by the time it was Queen of Ocean Parkway, I'm like, baby, Roya's mom is just trying her best. And we should all be a little more, gracious. So I think the parents play a bigger role because of that. And I'm like, you could be a little nicer to your mom. Yeah, so that's how it's changed. It hasn't changed the way I write the kids, but it's definitely changed the way I write the parents. Anybody else? Well, thank you so much. This was really great.
Thank you.